Divide and conquer seems pretty straightforward, but at the tail end of this video, I just want to delve into how easy the 1% find it to achieve such a thing. Like false flags, we'll go back 100 years or so, and we'll look at America, and that was fertile ground for this type of tactic because it was based on immigrants. They'd already had slavery, so there was a segregation right there. And then you had all the different types of immigrants, you know, the Irish, German, Italian, Chinese, Cuban, you name it. And while it was understandable for birds of a feather to flock together, you know, whether it be a language barrier or, you know, orientation, just familiarity, the powers that be understood this. And so what did they do? They took advantage of that by pitting one against the other. And that way, you know, everyone's distracted and they don't see the real enemy. The real enemy has always been and always will be the 1%. Now, in the 50s and 60s in the UK, there was an influx of immigration from places like the Caribbean, India, amongst other places. And whilst the government would tell you that was a humanitarian effort to give these people a better life and, you know, job security, etc., it was for a far more nefarious purpose. Essentially, what they wanted to happen was to chip away at national identity and national culture. They needed to transform it over time. Now, this is where political correctness plays a major role in this agenda, because people are afraid to mention things like race, even, you know, irrespective of what that may be, just because political correctness has defined talking about race as being racist. But in essence, you cannot be racist by reporting the truth. And that's all we're doing here. They didn't want certain people to assimilate. They wanted to cause divide over time, of which we'll talk a little bit about later. And so the 1% manipulate events like false flags, and then that's then fed through the media to create more unrest, more divide, and more fear. If you look at present day America and the fruitcake in the White House, there's never been so much division. I mean, it'd be hard to name them all, you know, from religion, race, nationality, class, lifestyle, gender, you know, pro-gun, anti-gun, pro-life, pro-choice. I mean, the list's endless yet. And again, that's what they wanted. People fall for this all the time, especially with bipartisan politics. You know, whether it's the left or the right, here or around the world, it's part of the same bleeding bird, yeah? You've got to understand that. Stop falling for it. And another thing to look out for, whether it be in the political arena or in general, is the paid protester. Now, people like George Soros, who's essentially the bagman for the Rothschild cabal, well, he'll donate to these entities under the guise of philanthropy. You know, he's given to many, many organisations like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And for the unsuspecting, that looks like, you know, a benevolent gesture. Yeah? He's trying to help Black lives. He's trying to help, you know, non-fascists. But again, it's the inversion of the truth. What they do is the paid protester will cause havoc, yeah? He'll vandalise stuff. And that'll then, again, be fed through the media as, look at these protesters, they're not peaceful, they're animals. And so, again, you really have to look at the bigger picture. And one thing you always have to ask yourself, who benefits from this, yeah? It always benefits the 1%. One of the reasons for 9/11 was to destabilise the Middle East, leading to the mass exodus of millions of refugees, most of which ended up in Europe. Now ask yourself this, why didn't Saudi Arabia accept any Syrian refugees? Nor did Israel. Now that's fodder for another video, because much like why ISIS never attacked these two countries, you know why? Because that is the head of the snake. And again, we'll come to that in another video. As I mentioned early on, and how the immigration to Britain in the 50s and 60s was there to chip away at their national identity, national culture, yeah. I mean, eventually they want to do away with nationalism altogether. And with the influx of the refugees from the Middle East, that plan was about to come to fruition. I mean, before 9/11, Islam didn't have a problem with the West, yeah. That was just fed to us like propaganda through your TV screen. You know, once the UK and the US had decimated lands over there, slaughtering millions of innocent people, it's not surprised a terrorist is born, yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning, isolated incidents of retribution. But again, you've got to understand the bigger picture here. Always you've got to consider who gains from this, and it's always the deep state, the 1%, yeah. It's just all about chaos for them, so they can bring in this new world order. And so refugees began arriving in Europe by the boatload. And even in a normal setting, this would have been a challenge to accommodate everyone successfully without incident. But with this added ulterior motive, it was impossible because that was never the plan. What the New World Order wanted was unrest and upheaval. There were some reports of, successful integration and people welcoming immigrants, but there were far, far more reports of vandalism, of terrorism, of rape, and again, not condoning any type of, antisocial behaviour, but you have to understand again, if the media's feeding one narrative, it's there to get the response from you, yeah, to get the reaction from you. You've always got to figure out who is benefiting from this, because much like the Soros paid protesters in America, he's got his hands in Europe as well. And as some individuals are going to have a chip on their shoulder, there are even more of these quote-unquote refugees, which are, agents essentially, that are there to cause the biggest unrest, which again causes the biggest divide. And the division is there for all to see. I mean, if you look at the TV nowadays, it's, fear here, it's division there. It's all to get you, on edge. But please direct your anger at the people that are orchestrating this. It's the deep state. I mean, again, your government has been bought and paid for a long time ago, so it's not unpatriotic to question that. The powers that be, they want to create as much unrest, as much turmoil, as much division as they can, so eventually it'll lead to civil war. Because if that happens, then it's game over. What they'll do then is they'll send in the UN, which is essentially the global army, and then they'll instill martial law. I mean, over here, the false flags, like the Vegas shooting, the Florida shooting, all the school shootings, they are orchestrated by the deep state in order to gain sympathy for people to give up their guns. I mean, there's another debate there. I'm just broad stroking that to let you know that in Europe, of course, guns are less plentiful, so martial law is going to be a lot easier to enact. There's going to be a contingent of people, probably the majority, that will welcome the UN stepping in, because they'll just see this unrest as something that can't be managed, and therefore they need the government's help. It's problem, reaction, solution again. The deep state causes the problem, they get the reaction of the people, the deep state, acting as your government, come in to offer the solution. You see how easy it is? Going back to political correctness, you have to just adjust your barometer just for a sec, because you have to ask yourself, why do certain immigrants get more concessions than certain nationals? And what I mean by that is the reports of a bacon butty being thrown at a mosque and a prison sentence being handed out, whereas grooming and raping of girls is somehow forgivable. So rather than blame the people that, were guilty of doing this, you've got to blame the system. And it's your government that handed these sentences or non-sentences out. You see what I'm trying to say? This is again to cause more unrest with the nationals. So they will instill more hatred towards the immigrants. And again, I'm not racist for pointing this out. I am merely trying to get you to see the bigger picture of who benefits. It's always the 1% who benefits, because in this instance, they get more division, and therefore it's part of their plan. If you've not tuned out by now, I just want to go over how the 1% manipulate is so easy when it comes to division. And it's regarding the suppression of information. I mean, most people identify with who they are through their nationality, their race, their job, their class, their lifestyle, so on and so forth. You know, I'm English, musician, Caucasian, atheist, straight. You know what I mean? It's all labels. When in essence, we're points of attention in infinite awareness, and that means we all possess the same power. And if we all tapped into that awareness, we could turn this thing around. Because this information hasn't been readily available, the 1% know that, and therefore they know that the majority of people see themselves as insignificant individuals, you know, with minimal capabilities. But if people were made aware of their potential, the results would be unbounded, and the power would revert back to the people, and the New World Order could never be achieved. So take a step back from it and just look at it in a different light, and try and figure out why there's so much division, why there's so much unrest in the world. No one's born a racist. No one's born with an aversion to any other person's lifestyle. It's all instilled in us as children, then through the system, then through your peers, and more importantly, through the media. They're manipulating you every day. So again, always figure who benefits from this, who benefits in the bigger picture, and it's always the 1%. It's all planned, people. Please wake up.